Good.
Hello.
Yeah, hello, Khaled. For those of you
Hi.
who don't know, Andre's here as well. For those of you who don't know, Khaled and Andre actually they used to be how the frequent VIP members of the book circle. They were
Exactly.
in every session. They graduated the group before in January. They started in January 2023. Anyways, here we are. Welcome everyone. And the interesting part is that everyone here is Android. I'm curious. It's always the Android people who are more into the book circle. I wonder why. But let's begin. Once again, I'm going to go in different order based on what I found the most interesting. And how about if we begin with the one, let your project speak for itself? How many of you like that chapter?
It was fun. It was fun.
How many
It's
of
a,
you? Huh? Go ahead.
it's a nice thing to implement. It's a great idea. I wonder how many people actually do stuff like that.
So that could be a fun project, actually. So you can connect any project you're working. Let's say connect if you want to have fun, connect your homework project to some lamp or something like that. And every time there it has a mistake or something, it lights up, for example. I mean, you don't really have to do that, but the idea, putting jokes aside, is it is very important to keep certain systems in place so that you become aware of the status of your project, because otherwise it can be very easy to ignore or forget. I don't know if you remember in the beginning of the education that I asked you to remove the emails from GitHub. Do you remember? Because yeah, did
Or
anyone
notification.
did anyone not do it and see what happened? So everyone did it. Okay. Well, if you don't do it, it's not a problem. The problem is that you get bombarded by emails every time you push code, telling you that for many modules that it is wrong because you don't have the solution, and it can be very annoying and intimidating. So in the beginning, students get a little bit like, "Hey, Humberto, I'm getting all these error emails. What happened?" And I said, "No, that's just the default behavior. Yeah, that's the default behavior, but you need to configure it." But anyways, it is very, very important. Let me show you. Wait, sorry. Let me show you a little demo of something that companies do a lot to keep um, kind of the status. Let me show you. I wouldn't say it's the same thing. It's not the same idea, but almost there. Let me look for maybe this one. Yeah, this could be a good example. This could be a good example. So if I share my screen and you see here my this stuff. This is just this is, by the way, the repository of Kotlin. So the programming language Kotlin is an open source language, and you can read the source code from here. But what I wanted to show you is that it is very common for companies to put these things in their projects. These are kind of badges, and they are used to display information that could be relevant. So, for example, we can see that the latest version of Kotlin is this 2.00 beta 4. We see that the build, that is the continuous integration build system, you can see that it's passing. In some cases, not in this project, they show, for example, code coverage, meaning how much of the code has been covered by test. Let me see if they have another example. Here you can see a little bit of different labels. Let's say if I search for, as an example, no, if I search for this, and let's say this one, for example, they do not have. Let's look for another one. Uh, let's see this. He doesn't have. Let's see this. Google research. This is why so many. They don't have. Okay, I don't find good examples, but you do find that a lot in the projects. I have them for my own projects for certain things. Like, for example, if the code is correctly formatted I have that. If the code is passing all my tests, I have that. If the code has an appropriate code coverage, I have that. So it's a way for me, or another way, it's for a way for the code to speak to me about its status. So keep that in mind whenever you're working on your projects. Have systems in place. It doesn't have to be a lamp as they are providing. It could be anything. Have systems in place that allow to get an idea of what is the status of your project. Enrique, go ahead. I saw your hand.
I'll send you a link to one of those projects that has like a percentage coverage in the.
Okay.
the
Okay, nice.
So if you want to show
I'll
it.
check in a minute. Yeah. But anyways, that is an idea. And if you want to get more fun, just implement something with smart lamps or things like that. Good. The next part, and this is one that I believe is quite appropriate for the class. What did you thought when you read the chapter "Learn to Say Hello World"? What came to your mind when you read that particular chapter?
I remember the first time when I tried.
Mhm,
As a code.
okay.
That's
Okay.
all.
Yeah.
But when I read the chapter, so I didn't get it well.
You didn't.
So
Okay.
it was a
Okay.
little bit, maybe
Mhm.
because I'm sick or something, I don't know.
What else?
It's like when you're working on a big project, or when you're working on like something bigger than the usual thing that, for example, we did on Kotlin. But now we're working on apps that are on Kotlin. We work on 10 exercises, which is basically 10 functions that do 10 things. On an app, you basically work on hundreds of functions that do hundreds of things. And then sometimes you think, oh no, the only way to test this thing is just to run the whole app and run the whole app and run the whole app. But you can sometimes just take the function that you want to test, take it outside, put it on a playground and test it. So that's sometimes you have to remember that an app with 100 functions is just 100 functions linked together. So if you want to test something, or you just have to go to the smaller instead of trying to think big, you can sometimes retreat to the smaller part of it. Oh,
Yeah.
I have a function that is returning the thing and then is constantly returning something that is, I don't get it, I don't get it, I don't get it. You can take that function out, put it on a playground, put a bunch of test cases for that function, and then test it and work on that function only instead of working in the context of the whole project. So
Yeah.
that,
So
Yeah.
so that exactly, that's correct. So basically the idea that he wanted to transmit with his little story was that he had some problem and he had this file that did a lot of stuff and it took a lot of time for the whole code to work. So when he approached his colleague, the colleague kind of extracted that piece of code into a separate place and then created kind of a small application to work only on that specific area so that they can focus on that specific part of the code that was giving problems. And that is correct. That is what you should do when you're working with apps and things like that. There will be a moment in which, as an example, you're working with login. Okay, login, no, login is not a good experience. Let's say a payment system. But before you pay, for example, you need to log in, you need to create an account. Every time you want to test the payment, you're not going to go through that whole process. So extract that part, put it somewhere else temporarily. Ideally, as soon as you open the app, it asks you to pay or whatever, and just test that specific part without worrying about the rest. So yes, making it easier for you. Khaled, I believe I saw your hand raised.
Yeah, actually, I just want to add that I found this part is really helpful because especially when you are working with a team and you have a big project, then you don't need to force yourself to understand all functions and go deep on all the project. If you have a bug, then you can't, as what this expert did, as taking this part where is the error and try to see what's the problem and fixing part by part. This will be very helpful.
Exactly. So it's about separation. Like think about that when you're working on your own homeworks, even though the complexity is not comparable to the type of projects that you work in the industry. Keep in mind that at the end of the day, you're gonna experience problems. Just encapsulate those, extract that, forget about the rest, and don't try to eat the whole thing in one bite. Take it by parts and take it one step at a time. All right, that was that one. I want to speak a little bit. Now I'm jumping to the last one, because this is one that I believe is applicable. I think all of you are in good shape to really understand this particular chapter, the one of make interfaces easy to use correctly and hard to use incorrectly. When you hear the word interface, now I want a technical answer. What are some examples of interfaces? He gave some examples in the first paragraph. Andre, yeah?
I think it's the screen when we interact with the user interface.
That is one example of an interface. So whenever you open an app, the user interface, that is an example. So yeah, that is an example of an interface. What else is an example of an interface?
Class interface.
The what?
Class interface.
The classes, exactly. So
Library.
for example, when you have a class and the class has a constructor, and you have all these parameters in the constructor, well, that is an interface of that class. What else? What could be another example?
Libraries.
Yeah, but elaborate a little bit more. What aspect of the library? The classes, for example, functions also have an interface. The name of the function, the parameters of the function, the return type of the function. When you interact with a library, for example, you're interacting with the functions of that library, and you're interacting with its interface. So, for example, you are expecting a given return type for a given function. You are providing parameters to that function based on its interface. Yeah. So another example would be an API. When you do not control the code in that API, there's an interface between your code and the backend code, and that interface is via the API system. So whenever you want to extract or get data from the internet via an API, a REST API, you need to read the documentation. You already know that you read the documentation so that you can become familiar at what is the interface of that API. Because as you already know, all APIs are different from each other. They have different requirements, different parameters, different endpoints. That's the interface. And what I want you to remember there are two things I want you to get out of this. The good thing is everyone here is Android. So for example, whenever you are building an app, as I tell you, it's not only about your code, it's also about the user interface. How will the user be using this? To be fair, whenever you are in a company, there's usually, not always, but there's usually a designer, which is the person that is responsible for creating that interface, not in code, but in design. And then you are part of the process, yes, but at the end, you are given the design and you are implementing it. But if it's you, the one that has to create that design, you need to think about how are users going to be using my application, my interface, and that has nothing to do with your code. That has to do with, in this case, the user experience, the user interface. Munat, go ahead, yes.
Yeah, I'll try to take it briefly here. So just for a few days, I did meet a guy on the library, and he owned a company, and he's working on an application, and that application is for the fitness industry. Okay, and he was really not happy with the interface, but when I did look at the app, I thought, you know what, this is really great. And he did build the interface with Flutter, and he using I think a BART language to develop the app, and the
Dart,
app is really
yes.
Dart, yeah. So and the application is really huge. But I told her the interface, it looks real, but but it's still I'm not happy with this, because then I just remember all what you say. That is the user who really react to the application when the user interface is really interesting, because it's not about what is behind it. So that's why they are gonna employ someone from Egyptian to try to build this to build the app,
Application.
the interface of the application, just the design and stuff like that. Even that, I was really happy with design. Yeah, it was really interesting.
One thing to keep in mind is that whenever you're building, we're speaking about interfaces now, like user interfaces. At the end of the day, when you're building this, you're going to have assumptions, and that's okay. You have to start somewhere, but you need to put those assumptions to the test. And how do you do that? By having, as an example, people using your application. It is not until you actually put the app out, so to say, to a test group or number of people, that you will really realize if the assumptions that you made were accurate or not, either for the good or for the bad. So, as I always say, you guys, to some extent, the students, you guys are my clients. I create all the systems and I have to make assumptions about how I think you are going to use the applications. Yeah. It is not until I launch whatever it is that I launch that then I need to observe. I need to observe how students react. Are they using this the way it's intended? Are they having troubles that I did not expect? Are they getting more confused than what I instead of being helped? So there has been many changes as a result of the way that students react. Now, let's be honest, sometimes students do like, I mean, it's explicitly telling you not to click there. Why are you clicking there? So in that example, it's like, okay, you just want to mess up the system. But other than that, in general, I need to see, okay, how are students reacting to these things? And many changes have changed. So the biggest example is the auto grading. From everyone here, only Katerina has the new version. She's on the group that they can check their solution from IntelliJ. And that is amazing, to be honest. So Katerina, you have no idea the pain that you have been saved compared to everyone else. No one else had that feature. They had to do a bunch of other stuff.
At least 6 hours of total waiting time. At
Well,
least.
no, I mean, I think you're exaggerating a little bit, but they had to definitely do much more. They had to do much more. So that is an example. Yes, Andre, sorry, you have your hand raised. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, about the topic interface, I think the big challenge when you create the app is what happens next is like many users testing your app. Sometimes many apps, the design they have, they confuse you a little bit, the logic of the
Exactly.
app. Another part is very challenge is when your app is not able in many devices. We have many device Android. So sometimes it happens with me, I open the app because my phone is very old. I don't see the button OK because sometimes I think when we create the app is not another situation is you need to think about different scenarios the user can use. I give it a sample, the tips, one homework we have.
Yes.
It's not just write the numbers, you need to create something scenario. Is the user write the comma or a dot or 2 dots, what happens? So that's a big challenge when you finish the app.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. That's one of the challenges about when you are developing applications that interact with the user. You need to try to look a few steps ahead to see what are possible ways that people can use this incorrectly. And I have to do it with all of you. I have to say, okay, what are possible ways that students can mess this up? And I have to, for example, the check button. What I'm telling Katerina, that again, it's just a button in the top of the homework that you click check, and it automatically checks your task. And I had to think, okay, what's the simplest thing that I could do? I had so many ideas of different ways how to make it, and I thought, the more complete, the more it has to be something that is for dummies. Like you cannot get it wrong, and even then people get it a little bit wrong. So I have to make some adjustments. Yeah. So yeah, that is right. We need to try to look ahead a few steps how people are going to might use this incorrectly so that we can prevent it from happening. But there's another thing I want to say. When you're creating interfaces, like for example, a class or a function, and I want to focus on those two, the majority of times, how do we begin? Like this, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but you will begin like, okay, I need to create a function that does this. So you go to your editor and you say fun, blah, 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 and you start implementing the code for that function. Although that works, there is a different mindset that I want you to have. Remember, the reason you create these interfaces like a function is because it's intended to be used. So the first question we want to ask before how I'm going to implement this is, how is this going to be used? In what context is this function going to be used? So for example, I remember back in my previous job, we will create we had to create a function. We will create the function like the skeleton, but instead of implementing it, we will say, okay, let's see how this interface, the name, the parameters, the return type, how this interface look at the moment of calling it. How would it look whenever we call this function? So instead of implementing the function, we will go to the place where we intend to use it, and we will say, for example, day dot 2 hours. And we say, is this how we want the function to be used? Is this how we want the function to look at the moment of using it? No, it's too complicated. Okay, let's go back and change the interface. We change the interface, then we go back to the place of calling it. Does it look better? Is it readable? Is it understandable? That is the main thing I want you to keep in mind, because we can forget why we create these functions, and we can get too into just the implementation details and then realize this is a terrible interface. Whenever I call this function, this is hard to understand. I don't know what this thing is doing. So keep that in mind. You begin by saying, okay, I need to create a function that does X. Okay, let me begin by putting the interface, the name, the parameters, the return type. Leave the body empty. Then go to the place where you intend to use that function and ask yourself, does this look like a understandable code? Does this look easy code? If the answer is no, go back and change the interface. Yeah, because this is what they said here. I really like this statement. He said, remember, here I'm reading, remember that interfaces exist for the convenience of their users, not their implementers. So you are writing these interfaces, the functions, the classes, the user interface, not for you, the developer, for the user. So you always need, and a user is not necessarily, so because now let's say you're creating an app that you want to launch, and you might think that the user is the person using your app. Yes, that is one example of a user, but another user of your function is your colleagues, your peers. They are also using your interfaces, not the user interface, but the interface of the functions that you create, the interface of the classes that you create. So you also have to be mindful when writing your code. How are people going to be using my function? Is this clear? Is it not clear? And stuff like that. Unfortunately, again, it will be for Katerina because she has the new content. But I think it's module 108, you're going to learn something that is called value classes. For everyone else, I believe I spoke to you about value classes, but when we reached Android, and it was a bit more informal in the lecture. Value classes, if you don't remember, it's a type of class. You know, Kotlin has many type of classes: data classes, sealed classes, a normal class, and it has this thing called value class. So one way to make your code more readable is, let's say that you have a function called login. What would be two parameters for a function called login?
Username and password.
Username and password. And most likely, what will be the type of those two parameters?
Strings.
Strings. You can do it like that, and that works perfectly fine. However, one way of making your code more readable, however, there's a little problem. If they are both of them are strings, you could think about this. You could accidentally put the password where the login is, where the username is, and put the. Let me open a. Are we good in time? Yes, we have enough time. Let me show you. Yes. Okay, so I can have a function. Let's see here. I can have a function called, this is too big, login, yes? And let's assume that this is just like this. And this can have password, which is let me just make this smaller. Password, which is a string. And it can also have a username that is also a string. Okay, so far so good. Do we agree? I do not see hands, so please say so far so good, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. At the moment of calling the function, let's say I'm calling the function down here, I could do login, and I can say, let's say this is my password, and let's say this is my email. However, in Kotlin, I could also do this. For this particular scenario, I could also do this, and the system will not complain. Remember, right now, I am passing by position. In this case, it is correct. First is the password, here's the password. Here's the username, or let's put this as the email to make it more clear. This is the email, this is the email. But because both of them are strings, I could do this, and I have introduced a bug. I have introduced a bug. Because both of them are strings, and both of them are strings, the system is saying, okay, this is valid. But you tell me, is this correct? Is this correct? What I have highlighted?
Nope.
No, it's not correct.
But you can use the parameter name.
Exactly. One way of solving this, you can say this is email equals to this, and this is password equals to that. But again, if we go back to what the book says, given the current implementation, there is the possibility of making errors. There is. I mean, there's nothing, absolutely nothing, preventing me from making this error. So what could be a solution? And at least in Kotlin, the answer is you use what is known as a value class. And I can create a value class called, let's say, password. It would look something like this. It would be value as an example, and then string. And then I can create another value class, which will be called, let's say, email. And they are only supposed to do one thing and one thing only, which is hold a value. It's kind of a wrapper. What's the benefit? That now I can say that for password, you need to pass me a password. Here's my type. And for an email, you need to pass me an email. Now, down here, I need to do, as an example, password equals to this. And then here, I need to do email is equal to this. And if for some reason, let me just copy this. If for some reason I do this, take a guess what's going to happen.
It's gonna
Will
work.
still run, right?
It will not run
Really?
because this here is type password. Look, the first parameter is type password. And what type am I passing?
Okay, now I see it.
I'm passing email. So what is the point I'm trying to make? By just making this little change, that instead of using strings and strings, I have created a dedicated type called password and a dedicated type called email, I have closed the door for someone to accidentally put them in the wrong order, given that an email and a password are represented by strings. So I encapsulated the string around a more domain language or domain vocabulary that now I am expressing. When I want to log in, I pass a password. And how do I know? Because of not only the name, but also the type. And when I log in, I have the email, but it's expressed not only on the name of the parameter, but also on the actual type of that parameter. Yes, and the benefit, well, from an understandability point of view, from a readability, is significantly easier to read, but also to prevent errors. Now I cannot, I'm going to put this down, I cannot make this mistake. Even if I wanted to, this will complain at compile time. It will not even run because it's going to tell me a type mismatch. It's going to tell me, hey, Humberto, a password is expected. Here you can see a password is expected, but you're given an email. And it will say an email is expected, but you're given a password. This is one example of how, if you read this interface, it closes the door to certain type of errors. And from a readability point of view, I mean, what can be clearer than this? It's an example. Yeah, value classes. Good. Anyways, yeah, so that is what you need to keep in mind when you're creating your interface, your functions, your classes. How is this function going to be used? So do not just be like this, looking at your own function. Remember that that function is used in a bigger context. So create your interface and then ask yourself, and I do that all the time. Yeah, I do my skeleton and I say, okay, let me see how this looks. This doesn't look good. It's not readable. It's not really nice. Let me change the interface. This looks better. And then you go, okay? Any thoughts on that? Any thoughts? For me, this is a very important chapter, and I think it's quite relevant to our education. Any thoughts on this? Anyone?
Yeah,
No?
you just have to think about how the thing is going to be used, regardless of what you will like. I have that thing in my head that I make like assumptions based on my experience, but I cannot
Mm.
do that. I have to make assumptions based on more generalize my assumptions instead of trying to,
And
but it's really
and to,
hard to like,
yeah, but also to push a little bit. I mean, I don't think there's nothing wrong with using your own experience. I mean, experience is always valuable. I think just to add, it will be you need to put those assumptions to the test. One way of doing it is, of course, at the career internship, you're by yourself. But if you're in a team, there's where you have other colleagues to challenge your assumptions. If you're creating your app, that would be putting it out to certain people so that they can give you feedback. So I would say, I mean, I also make my own assumptions based on a previous experience, but I don't leave it there. I then have to put them to the test. That is the extra step.
Mm.
Yeah, extra step.
Yeah.
Good.
I
You want to say
think
something,
this,
Kalle?
this improve the quality of the code and make it less vulnerable for bug.
Exactly,
if
correct.
Yeah.
Correct. As a last thing, we're 1 minute past, but the longevity of interim solutions. Remember, I have said this mainly to the people studying Android now, but do not create solutions that are hack. You have heard me say it a number of times, yeah, the solution works, but it's very hacky. Don't do that. Like, make sure that whatever solution you create, it's a solution that can be easily maintained, that it can be understand. Just don't, it works, I can go home. No, don't create hacky solutions. And you know when you're doing a hacky solution, the student doesn't have to be an expert to know. They look at their solution and they know in the bottom of my heart, they know maybe Humberto is gonna say something, but they say I'm just gonna leave it anyways, until they reach class and they have to say, hey, that's a hacky solution. An example of a hacky solution is you will see this, or you remember from module, the one of sets and list. I say no duplication allowed. So the student will have a list, then they will have a list, then to a set, and back to a list. I'm like, yeah, I know what you want to do. I know why you do it, but that's a bit of a hack. Why do you even start with a list, for example? So that's an example of a minor but hack. Like you're going from a list to a set back to a list. I know why
on
you're doing it, but
on
yeah.
the inverting the numbers, doing it the string method. Like,
For example, as well, change it to a string, then loop over it, and then change it back to an integer, for example. Yeah, things like that. Anyways, but thank you everyone for today. Really happy to see Andre and Khaled again.
Thank you.
Yeah, hopefully you can join again more times. I know you guys are businessmen now and you're quite busy nowadays. But anyways, thank you for joining today. Let's stay in touch then and have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Absolutely.
You know,
Same
Thank
to
you,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.